The world learned about this case in 1989. The search for a 21-year-old young man from the United States named Mark Calroy led to the discovery of one of the most incredible cases ever recorded in the world. This case involved the occult and Santeria, and the man responsible for these events was Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, a Cuban nicknamed Padrino, which means Godfather. He was a follower of the Palo Mayombe religions, and what he did will astonish you with its brutality. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born on November 1, 1962, in Miami, Florida, USA. His parents were refugees from Cuba. Adolfo had 3 brothers by different fathers, and from childhood he was baptized Catholic and served in church, even though his parents were not very religious. His mother was a follower of Santeria, a religion that came to Cuba in the 18th century with slaves from the Yoruba people of Nigeria. In Santeria, there is no concept of good and evil, it is left to the judgment of the religion's followers. After the death of her first husband, Adolfo's mother decided to move to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where she was introduced to the Palo Mayombe religion. She became so interested in the cult that she officially became a priestess. In this way, she introduced her son, Adolfo Constanzo, to these practices. In 1970, the woman decided to return to Miami. Over the course of several more years, Adolfo's mother married 3 times. Her last husband practiced occultism and also sold illegal substances, gradually shaping Constanzo's path. His behavior grew increasingly worse, and he and his mother were arrested multiple times for robberies. Constanzo was expelled from the university for bad behavior and continued the practices into which his mother had introduced him. As a teenager, he formed a close friendship with a Palo Mayombe priest who taught him rituals intended to help him achieve anything he needed to succeed in life. With his newly acquired knowledge, Adolfo Constanzo began offering black magic services in Miami in 1980. In 1983, friends told him that one could make good money modeling in Mexico, so he moved to the Zona Rosa area of Mexico City. There he quickly became wealthy, was good-looking, and was incredibly charismatic. He was attracted to both men and women. He established his own business and performed protection and cleansing rituals, which earned him a good income. Allegedly, very famous people in Mexico used his services: politicians, actors, businessmen, and famous police officers. During this period, he continued to practice Santeria extensively. His drive for power led him to conduct rituals involving human sacrifice and cannibalism. He became so popular that he traveled to various parts of Mexico, including Matamoros in Tamaulipas, one of the country's most important border points. There he met people from different organizations, offering them spiritual protection for large sums of money. Adolfo's business thrived, and in the following years his career took off. He began carrying out powerful protection rituals that required human sacrifice. He did not act alone but was supported by Martin Quintana Rodriguez and Omar Oria Ochoa, his most loyal followers. In Matamoros, he collided on the highway with a car whose driver turned out to be Sarah Aldrete, a tall, beautiful blonde whom he immediately fell in love with. She studied anthropology at the University of Texas. He invited her for coffee and told her he was a priest of the Palo Mayombe cult and that many businessmen and artists had become successful thanks to his help. After giving Sarah a tarot card reading, she felt very drawn to him. After their conversation, he asked if he could do anything to help her. She then brought her boyfriend, Serafin Hernandez, and her uncle Elio to him. They were involved in drug sales and vehicle theft. She wanted Adolfo to help them in their dealings so that business would go well. When Constanzo invited them to his house, they were amazed. The house was full of artworks and mystical objects. There were bundles of dollar bills, gold bars, and plenty of jewelry. Adolfo explained that Santeria was expensive because he had to offer a lot to the spirits or else they would become angry. After they reached an agreement, Seraph stayed in touch with him. They became inseparable. Their romance brought them together, and soon Seraph learned everything she needed to know to become a priestess of Constanzo's cult. As part of the cult, they carried out strange ceremonies together. As they made progress, they began to recruit new members and taught them the rituals and spells of dark magic. Their students were between 20 and 23 years old. Sarah showed them a film about Santeria in which a psychiatrist who worked for the police sacrificed his son to meet the sect's needs, whose main goal was general prosperity. Members of the sect had to give up everything they cherished, including their own blood. Adolfo promised new sect members that they would become completely invulnerable to bullets and gain the ability to become invisible if they followed his instructions exactly. In the following years, horrifying events began in Matamoros. The police found 8 corpses that had been brutally mutilated and flayed. The bodies were tied to a cement block by the river. There was no explanation, but it sent shivers through those who witnessed it. The sect was located in a remote spot on the Santa Elena Ranch, several kilometers from the city. There was a cauldron called a ganda, needed for protection from evil spirits. The ingredients in this cauldron were even more horrifying, a mixture of wood, cigars, animal and human bones, and skulls that still had brains in them, most belonging to white people, as tradition held it was easier to influence their brains than those of dark-skinned people. Torture was also a necessary element in such a sacrifice. Everyone was gathered at the ranch to begin the ritual. The victim was Gilberto Sosa, a former police officer involved in trafficking illegal substances. After extensive torture, they put him in boiling water, which they later drank. The cultists believed that from head to toe they were infused with a power that made them extremely strong. What they did on this ranch is difficult to describe, and it remains one of the worst tragedies that occurred in Mexico. It was March 14, 1989. Constanzo needed an American for a new invulnerability ritual for one of his clients, so he went looking for a victim in places frequented by young students who had come to Mexico seeking entertainment. He chose as his victim Mark Calroy, a young medical student who had arrived in Mexico for 4 days. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Mark and his friends left the place where they had been partying, deciding to call it a night. They were very tired and drunk. The young men headed toward a bridge that led to the border between Mexico and the United States. Mark stepped away briefly to urinate on the narrow road. At that moment, 2 members of Adolfo's sect were in the truck observing the young men. They approached Mark and put him into the truck. Meanwhile, his friends waited for him, but after a few minutes they noticed he was gone. When Mark realized he was in danger, he tried to escape and got out of the truck when the driver stopped to relieve himself. However, Mark didn't notice that there was another truck behind them. When the men in that truck saw him trying to flee, they grabbed him and forced him into their vehicle. The two trucks drove several kilometers until they reached a farm. There he was told to sit in a hammock and was reassured that nothing bad would happen to him. Hours passed. Mark was offered food, and around noon he was taken to a room that smelled terrible and was full of flies. His hands and feet were bound, and then he was attacked with a machete. Mark's friends, realizing they couldn't find him anywhere, decided to contact the police and alert his parents. His worried parents began looking for their son. After 48 hours, the police in Matamoros and Brownsville started searching hospitals, prisons, and morgues. The Border Patrol searched near the Rio Bravo, but found no trace of Mark. His parents then traveled to Matamoros to pressure the police. At the same time, the FBI and other U.S. agencies got involved in the investigation. A reward was offered for any information on Mark's whereabouts. The case came to light after an incident involving Constanzo cult member David Cerner. He drove a Chevrolet truck past a checkpoint controlled by the Mexican Army and the federal police. Since he did not stop, officers followed him on deserted roads until he pulled over. They found traces of illegal substances and a .38 caliber shotgun on him. At the time of his arrest, they couldn't charge him with anything. Even the weapon they found wasn't reason enough to prosecute him. He was asked where he was going. He replied that he was on his way to a farm called Santa Elena. He also confessed that he was a member of a Santeria sect that carried out numerous animal and human sacrifices. These statements seemed absurd, but the police decided to search the farm. They asked him who led the organization, and he gave the name Adolfo Constanzo. Police officers were sent to verify whether David Cerner's story was true. When they arrived, they asked the ranch caretaker if he knew the man. He said he didn't, since many people came and went there. The officers then showed him a photo of Mark Calroy. The caretaker immediately recognized him and said that he had cooked him a meal about a month earlier. A few days later, on April 9, 1989, a list of names and addresses of people involved in the sect was found. 4 people were arrested: Sergio Martinez, called Butterfly, Serafin Hernandez Jr., Elio Hernandez, known as Tube, and the ranch caretaker, Domingo. After thorough questioning, all 4 gave statements that matched on several points. They all spoke about a leader named Padrino, a Cuban magician who had led them into a series of gruesome human sacrifice rituals. He promised them protection from the police and even invulnerability to bullets. The detainees also said he had an accomplice believed to be a witch, a tall and beautiful Mexican woman. Thanks to the wealth of information, the two were identified as Adolfo Constanzo and Sarah Aldretti, but their whereabouts were unknown. A few hours later, Officer Roberto Garcia showed the detainees a photo of Mark Calroy, and they confessed that Adolfo had indeed taken his life during a Santeria ritual. Having heard such a horrifying confession, the police decided to visit the ranch. On Tuesday, April 11, 1989, they arrived at the ranch with the detainees. They opened a door to one of the outbuildings, and the smell that came from within alerted everyone. Inside, they found items used for holy rituals. One wall contained an improvised altar with pepper and garlic, around which were small pots containing ritual objects such as beads, coins, and the heads of sacrificed chickens and goats. In the middle was a goat's head, impaled by a small trident. The entire floor was strewn with cigar butts, empty aguardiente bottles, and red stains. In the center of that structure stood a large iron cauldron, a gonda. Its contents gave off a foul stench and attracted many flies. In the cauldron were several sticks and a thick stew made of coagulated blood, cooked with parts of intestines. The feeling of being in that place was indescribable. It was evident that horrifying things had happened there. After exiting the outbuilding, the cult members were once again asked to show where the victims' graves were. They pointed out newly dug graves containing 11 victims. The police never expected to encounter anything like this. They found Mark Calroy 1 meter below the surface. He had been unearthed by a backhoe. His remains were torn apart, missing his head, several finger joints, and his genitals, as well as his spinal cord. To identify him, the police used his dental records. The teeth matched. That day, they dug up bodies until nightfall. Many were missing ribs and hearts. One of the most gruesome cases was solved. Meanwhile, Adolfo, Constanzo and Sarah fled from the police to Brownsville and from there flew to Mexico City. Along the way, they picked up more members of the organization. Thanks to their connections to influential people, they remained one step ahead of the authorities. On May 5, 1989, the first clue to their whereabouts emerged. Someone reported that a man in Mexico City's Cuauhtémoc district was frequently purchasing dollars. Surprisingly, the description of this person indicated he was one of the sect members, a confidant of Constanzo. The police began surveillance of the area. Sarah looked out the window and saw many officers on the streets. She decided to write a note asking for help, claiming that Adolfo Constanzo was holding her hostage. She threw the paper out the window of an apartment on Rio Sena Street 19, where she was allegedly being held. The note reached the police. The next day, a patrol passed through the streets near the house. One of Constanzo's men went outside and noticed they were surrounded by undercover officers. He returned to the apartment and told the others. Adolfo himself leaned out the window and saw it all with his own eyes. When the criminals realized they were surrounded, they decided to attack the police first. From another window in the apartment, Tube took out an AK-47 to greet them. Constanzo gave the order to throw dollars out the window to distract everyone and make an escape, but the rapid response officers didn't fall for it, and a shootout ensued. When he was cornered and didn't know what else to do, Adolfo collected the money and burned it. Upon realizing there was no way out, he made a desperate plan. He believed in his own immortality and hid in a closet with Martin Quintana, Tube, whom he ordered to shoot him. Adolfo decided to become the final sacrifice on Earth. Tube used the weapon and killed them both. By then, Sarah had taken cover and pretended to be a victim. She had no choice but to surrender. The story of the sect, filled with victims and gruesome events, came to an end. Because of the severity of the case, the police decided to withhold many details. Sarah always claimed she did not participate in the cult and that Constanzo's rituals interested her only because she wanted to finish her anthropology studies at the university. She accused the authorities of destroying evidence and clues, such as the outbuilding on the Santa Elena Ranch, where Adolfo had sacrificed several people. The police burned down that outbuilding. Sarah Maria Aldretti was initially sentenced to 62 years in prison, but after a while, the sentence was reduced to 50 years. She was held in the Santa Marta Acatitla prison and in 2011 was transferred to a prison in Mexicali, Baja California. During her imprisonment, she wrote and published a book. At that time, she still had 33 years left to serve. She is currently in the women's prison of Tepepan. Of the 4 sect members, only 3 remain in the Victoria prison in Tamaulipas. The 4th member, Elio Hernandez Rivera, took his own life behind bars. Thank you for watching, and take care.